Hello everyone and welcome to my full conversation with Federico Faggin. Federico is the inventor of the microprocessor, founder of two companies, Zilog and Synaptics, which we talk more about in this conversation. Federico is the recipient of the 2009 National Medal of Innovation and Technology, which was awarded to him by President Barack Obama. As if that isn't enough, Federico is currently funding the study of consciousness through his foundation, the Federico and Elvia Faggin Foundation. Personally, he is embarking on quite a rigorous study of consciousness in his own life, and he has a theory of consciousness that reshapes the way in which we view our entire universe. In this conversation, we talk about Federico's journey to inventing the microprocessor, some of the difficulties that he encountered along the way, and what led him to studying consciousness currently. Stay tuned to the end of the conversation to hear Federico discuss his definition of success and how that's changed in his life. Enjoy my conversation with Federico Faggin. Hello everyone, today I am in the heart of Silicon Valley in California, and I'm speaking with Federico Faggin. So thank you so much for joining me today, Federico. I'm wondering if you can describe a bit of your educational background. What did you study in school? A little bit more about that.
Okay, well, I was born and raised and educated in Italy. Vicenza is the town where I was born. I went to first to technical high school, and then I went to University of Padua, where Galileo Galilei taught back in, toward the end of the 1500s. And so I study physics, which is really my passion.
Okay. And did you ever have a period where you weren't really sure what you wanted to do with your studies, with your degree? You didn't know the direction that you wanted to take it?
Well, actually, the general direction, no. Because since I was 4, I decided that I like machines because I can understand machines. I cannot understand people. They are mean sometimes.
Yeah.
But machines, I can understand it. And if you understand it, they're not mean to you. So
yeah. So you always had that motivation.
So that motivation was, was there, and I love airplanes and so on. So I fell in love with the first model plane that I saw when I was 11, and I decided to build one myself, which eventually I did, a few months later. So that was the start, and then later on I wanted to understand more deeply how things actually work, how does this world work, how is it put together, and that's why I chose physics instead of engineering. Engineering would have been more, more appropriate for my interest also in building things, in designing and building things. But I had a deeper need to understand how things actually work.
And you had that driving sense of curiosity your whole life.
Yeah, that's right. And physics was, really was at the heart of that question.
So I'm wondering if you could take us to, it's 1968, correct? When you developed the technology behind the first microprocessor. And can you describe the scientists, the engineers that were involved in that discovery?
Yes. Okay. Well, you're talking about the MOS transistor, which is a device that is using pretty much all of the microelectronics, which is pretty much all of electronics these days. In those days, those transistors were made using aluminum gate. The gate is the control electrode of this device. The device has two other pins, two other points of contact. One is called the source, and the other one is called the drain. When you apply a voltage to the gate, you can make current flow between the source and the drain.
Okay.
And the current may also be interrupted depending on the voltage that you apply to the gate. So it's the ideal device to make a switch.
Okay.
A switch is simply two wires that touch each other or not. Okay. Except in a switch you use your hands to make the connection. In a integrated circuit, in a transistor, you apply a voltage or two different voltages on the gate of the transistor. So when the voltage is applied, you close the transistor, you close the switch. When it's not applied, the switch is open. That's as simple as that. But when you put billions of those transistors together, you can make very interesting computers.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
and that's exactly what was at the heart of the digital revolution. However, in those days, these switches were not very good. They were not fast enough, they were too big, and they consumed too much power. And so the idea was to reduce all the parasitics, all the elements that were taken away from the pure function of a switch. So the most important one was the overlap capacitance between the gate and the source and the drain. There was an idea that was already advanced by Dr. Bauer to actually make a self-aligned gate, meaning the gate somehow could define the source and the drain. So independent of where the gate was misaligned, you could always have the same source and drain overlap capacitances, and they will be reduced to a minimum. So this idea had been advanced a couple of years earlier. I actually had not heard about it, but I came up with the same idea, and I decided to use polysilicon, actually instead of aluminum, polysilicon, because the aluminum, which was what the experiment of Bauer later on I found out it were made with, the aluminum could not withstand the high temperature necessary for the process. So you could just make some experiments, show that the idea basically worked, but they were not useful unless you could do it in a manufacturing process. And so by using polysilicon, it was possible now to create a self-aligned transistor with a silicon gate. With that, I was able to achieve about 5 times the speed for the same power dissipation and half the size of the transistor. So all of a sudden we had a factor of 10 technology, much more powerful than what was there before, for the same cost. So with this trick, so to speak, it was then possible to put a lot more transistors, so you could make a microprocessor and many other devices. And that technology, it took a little while for it to be adopted, but by 5 years later, it was adopted by the entire industry, and it was basically the technology that allowed all this, enormous growth in the technology to occur. In fact, it was used it's still used today, but there was no other way of doing transistor until the last 5 years or 8 years, when as you go smaller and smaller, you cannot use the polysilicon and the silicon dioxide because they have characteristics that are not sufficient to increase the performance. So now the transistors of today are much more complex structures, but of course they're much smaller, which allows to pack more per chip, and therefore continue the increase in performance with time, which is generally known as Moore's law.
And from the inception of the idea to when it's actually implemented, were there any major struggles that you had where you thought this isn't going to be able to be implemented?
That's for example the original material that I used was amorphous silicon that was deposited in a vacuum chamber, but that amorphous silicon actually would break at the oxide steps. So myself and another person, another engineer, Tom Klein, we figured out that by using polysilicon instead of amorphous silicon, we could actually have step coverage, much more step coverage. Then we found that aluminum could also break. But then we use a way to smooth the oxide by using high level of phosphorus, which were also very important to reduce the contamination of the silicon as a final process before you would seal the entire structure. So all those tricks were found along the way that made the process highly reliable and have all the characteristics that I was telling you before. So,
And did you find that you had this desire to continually refine and improve your inventions, or was there a point when you were thinking, okay, this is it, like I'm going to give this to the world? Do you have a desire to completely, keep working with it, or?
Well, I had the desire for this technology to actually be second to none. Fairchild Semiconductor in those days was a relatively large company, and they were not really that aggressive in using new technology, particularly new technology that was developed in their own laboratories. There was a little bit of non-invented here because the laboratories were separate from the main activity of the company. So there was a little bit of finger pointing, between the two areas. And one of the things that was missing that the engineers in production and in design wanted was what was called the bootstrap load. It's a type of structure that allows you to achieve an output in a logic gate equal to the supply voltage.
Okay.
So if you could do that, you could use certain techniques that would highly simplify the design of logic circuits. That didn't appear possible with the silicon gate because you had to have a nice capacitor, but where you had the polysilicon, you couldn't have a junction underneath because it was exactly the point to use that as a mask against diffusion underneath, to make a self-aligned gate. So that was a big problem. Okay. Eventually, I was able to figure out how to do it without having to put another junction underneath, which would cost money and an extra masking step. In those days, when you had 4 masking steps, to go from 4 to 5 was considered impossible to do.
Yeah.
Today, of course, you use 30 masking layers and nobody flinches, but in those days, that's the way it was. So that one actually was the final invention that I made that allowed them to make two-phase logic circuits very effectively, where you could gate special pass transistors that otherwise you couldn't do.
Okay.
It's too complicated to explain in a few seconds, but basically that was the last piece missing. And of course, at that point, I wanted to design the most complex circuits possible using the technology that I had invented. So I looked for a job because Fairchild, after Noyce and Moore, they were the co-founders of Intel, left Fairchild. Yeah. Gordon Moore was the head of the R&D lab, and Bob Noyce was the head of the division, the semiconductor division of Fairchild. When they left, they brought a bunch of people with them, and they created a fair amount of problems within Fairchild. They started, they started taking a lot of the good people, and the company was not doing it so well. Okay, and so I decided that perhaps and also I figured that Intel was going to use the silicon gate technology because it was the most advanced technology available. And in fact, my boss was one of the first people to leave and join Intel. Les Vadez was the name of my boss. And he was a friend of Andy Grove, and Andy Grove was one of the first people that were hired at Intel. So I mean, that was the beginning of Intel. And so I asked Vadez to if he had a job for me in design, because at that point, by the time I decided, Intel had already announced a product using the silicon gate technology called the 1101, the first static memory in production. 256 bits. Okay. Imagine 256 bits. Today you have 256 gigabits in one chip. So that was the best that could be done in those days. Yeah. So So anyway, so that's how I decided, I decided to move beyond silicon gate, using it as a, for designing complex circuits, and I went to Intel.
Okay.
That was the move that then got me to design the first microprocessor.
Yeah. And did you have a sense for the magnitude of what you had done at that time? Did you see how it would impact the trajectory of technological development?
Yeah, when you have something that is 10 times better than something else, I mean, you got something, right? I mean, I was a kid, but still, I was not stupid.
Was that scary to you to realize that, or was it just thrilling?
No, I mean, for me, it was a matter of fact. I mean, so that's the way it is, right? So if you want to do the best thing you can, you got to use this technology, because you have removed all of the elements that were against you in the prior technology. The other thing that was essential was the leakage current, because you could clean up the old system, the old wafer of impurities after you have created the fundamental structures. Okay. So they were already sealed. You could clean them up. Then the leakage current could be reduced by a factor of 2 orders of magnitude, more than 100 times.
Oh, wow.
And that was fundamental to make dynamic circuits, because in dynamic circuits you store some charge in a capacitor that charge leaks away, and so if it leaks away too fast, you cannot have a working circuit. So that's as simple as that. So that was a major coup that allowed all the dynamic memories, all the dynamic circuits that we were doing in those days, they could have a decent minimum frequency of operation. And so that was the foundation of all of the microelectronics. In fact, as I said, like 10 years ago, 100% of all the circuits in production use silicon gate technology, just about 98%, because bipolar had disappeared. Bipolar was the technology that was used when I started. All the integrated circuit used a different type of transistor than MOS transistor. It was called bipolar transistor.
Okay.
And the bipolar transistors, were power hungry. They were much faster than MOS, but they used too much power.
Okay.
And, so the speed power product was not as good as MOS. Okay. And with silicon gate, then that factor of 10 really improved dramatically, that speed power product, and eventually the MOS technology wiped out almost completely the bipolar devices.
Okay.
Yeah. So so that basically in the last 20 years, actually the last probably 30 years, bipolar technologies has been abandoned essentially. So you only use for special applications.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. And shifting gears a little bit, I'd like to ask you about your efforts to fund the study of consciousness through the Federico and Elvia Faggin Foundation. It's so interesting to me that you're so accomplished in a very technological realm, and then completely switching to a very different sort of more philosophical realm. But you talk about how your fascination for, or maybe desire to make a conscious computer sort of propelled your study of consciousness. Yeah. Do you think it's possible to make a computer that rivals human consciousness? Do you think that's even possible?
No, it's not. Yeah. But let's get there a step at a time, because it's not obvious.
Yeah.
Particularly because in a materialistic worldview, people believe that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain. So if you take that position, then by definition, consciousness is a product of matter. And if it is a product of matter, then obviously you ought to be able to make a structure of matter that is also conscious. Yeah. It's only logical. But the problem is that the idea that only matter exists is challenged by the existence of consciousness. Nobody can explain why consciousness exists as a product of matter. Physics, neuroscientists, nobody has been able to explain how consciousness can arise if you have atoms banging against each other. How is that possible? So I believe that we need to start from a different starting point.
Yeah.
But well, I'll get there. But let me finish. Let me tell you a few things about how I got there, because there is a thread between Silicon Gate and the study of consciousness.
Yeah.
And the thread is, of course, that computers have really demonstrated the power of the mind by allowing us to essentially duplicate our understanding, our comprehension of structures, by converting them into algorithms that are run in a computer. So the computer is mimicking what our mind does. And before computers, people were not thinking that you could build structures that appear to have reason or appear to have intelligent behavior like computers today. So that brought me to the question of how does the brain works. Everybody claims that the brain is like a computer, but it's actually not. The like is not true. It is an information processing device for sure, but it is not like a computer at all. We don't know where the memory is. Certainly there is no programming the way that we have programmed computers. It certainly is not digital. There are digital phenomena, but there are many analog phenomena. So I mean, it's a much more complex structure. And so in the mid-80s, there was an interest in neural networks. And so after I started my first company, which was Zilog.
Yeah.
Zilog was the company that started at the end of 74. And it was the first company in the world entirely dedicated to microprocessors. And it was my foray into the world of business, because after developing the first microprocessor and all the first generation and second generation of microprocessor at Intel, I decided to start my own company, partly because Intel was more interested in memories than in microprocessors, and I felt that the future was in microprocessors. So I did that. There we developed. I came up with the idea of the Z80, and I was directed the whole project. And the Z80 was became a very widely used microprocessor. In fact, it is still in high volume production today. It was introduced exactly 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It's still being produced by the hundreds of millions a year today. But as I work in that area, of course, I got to learn a lot about myself in relationship to managing a company, because one thing is to run a project, one thing is to start a company and managing it and growing it and so on. So that was also part of this thread that connects me to consciousness. Then I started to be interested in neural networks, and started another company in the mid-80s called Synaptics. That's the company that developed the early touchpads and touch screens, which are used everywhere. The company is a public company right now, and is doing quite well. At any rate, the start of that company was about making learning systems, because neural network promise to be able to actually do pattern recognition, for example, very effectively, much better than we knew how to do with conventional top-down techniques.
Yeah.
What is, in those days was artificial intelligence. So I got interested in neuroscience, because I needed to understand a little more about how the brain works if we wanted to do something that was similar to what the brain seemed to be doing. And so I studied for 4 or 5 years. I studied biology and neuroscience, because that was not my background, so I needed to understand what was going on.
Yeah.
But toward the end of that period, I said, well, what about consciousness? And nobody talks about consciousness. I mean, that to me seems to be the most interesting thing that a brain does, because in those days I thought that, like everybody else, that the brain is the one that actually produces consciousness. And so I said, how would I do a conscious computer. How could I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, and the more I thought about it, the more impossible the task appeared. I read a lot of, a lot about consciousness. Nobody really was even, attempting to explain how feelings, because consciousness is about feeling, is about the experience through feelings, the experience of the outer world, the external world, the experience of our internal world, the experience, the experience of our own self-knowing, and on it goes. So that's how we know, or we know that we know, or we know that we don't know.
Yeah.
Knowing is based on consciousness. It doesn't, a machine doesn't know that it knows, or it doesn't know that it doesn't know. A machine is simply a action-reaction mechanism that moves according to a program. The machine can also learn, but the learning is very limited. Okay, so it can only learn to do a better task at the task that you have the machine to do. Okay, but we are able to look up and ask questions. What are those points of light up in the sky? Yeah. Okay, the computer, if he asks a question, is because you put in his memory to ask that question, but he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Okay, so comprehension, feelings, and comprehension based on feelings. Feelings provide the background of knowledge. Comprehension is finding how that knowledge, the pieces of that knowledge are interconnected, finding a pattern inside a pattern. That is what consciousness is for. So not only that, but is what makes life worth living. If you don't have consciousness, you have no joy, no pain, no nothing, no experience. I mean, you have just an automatic. I was going to say automaton. Yeah. You are an automaton, right? Moving according to whatever the mechanism of your automatic movement is. You have no self-consciousness. You nothing. So the question then is, how come that our body appear to be machines, and how come that we can be conscious? Well, because even our body is not really a machine. Okay, if you look at a living cell, and of course we are built of, in our case, trillions of living cells, and so each living cell is actually a quantum system. If you ask yourself, you probably have heard these days people talk about making a quantum computer. Okay, a quantum computer is a computer that, instead of using bits, ones and zeros, the Boolean logic bits of all the digital machines that we build, instead of using bits, they use what are called qubits. A qubit is actually the superposition of 0 and 1 into a qubit, which has an infinity of values between 0 and 1. Okay? So something like this apparently does computation. And you can do computation using qubits, and then you get the answer when you collapse the wave function, as they say in quantum physics, and you get the answer in our three space dimension plus one time dimension in our world. But the actual computation cannot be done in this world. It has to be done somewhere else.
Okay.
So where else can it be done?
Yeah.
Okay, well, physicists don't know the answer. They know that it works, so they are trying to apply, the theory, quantum physics, and the various technologies to be able to do that, and I'm convinced they will be able to do it, but from the explanatory point of view, they have no explanation. So there has to be some reality behind the reality of the physical world, which is a Boolean reality. Here you have 0 or 1. You cannot have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, which is the qubit. Okay? But the computation can be done, if you have qubits, can be done in parallel in all the possible combinations of states that a computer might have. Therefore, you can do computations that are exponentially faster than the computation that you can do with the standard computer. Okay? Yeah. But that computation is not done in this physical world. It is done in some other physical world, which is beneath, underneath, supports this physical world, this 3+1 reality. Okay? So this is what quantum physics is telling us, even if we don't really understand it to the very bottom. So consciousness, as far as I'm concerned, exists in that other reality where you can do quantum computation. In fact, it may exist, in my opinion, it exists in a reality which is even deeper than that.
Yeah.
Underneath all of the reality, all of the physical realities, and the physical realities emerge out of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is a fundamental property of nature, of reality, of the world, before matter. In other words, it is consciousness that creates matter instead of the other way around. Okay. So I started a foundation. You already mentioned Federico and the Faggin Foundation for the study of consciousness. This is not a philosophical study of consciousness. It's actually is an exercise in physics, trying to develop a new physics, starting with cognitive principles instead of materialistic principles. Physics started with the idea that only matter, space, time, and matter exist. And energy, of course, but energy and matter, as you know, are two facets, two faces of the same coin. So, if we start with the idea that there is only one energy, the same energy that produced space, time, and matter in the Big Bang, right? You know, the most favorite theory of physics of the creation of this physical universe. Suppose that this energy, of which everything is made, is also conscious, is also aware. Okay? What happens? Okay? All of a sudden, awareness or consciousness is the foundational property, is the cognitive property. So if you start with that, you develop physics, but starting with this energy, so you don't have to put consciousness back later as an afterthought, but consciousness is there from the beginning. Okay? So from the beginning, there is purpose and meaning in the universe, which of course, there is no purpose or meaning to a theory, a materialistic theory. You know, physics only tells you that all that matters is randomness. Everything happens by random events which eventually conjure up to create this world. Well, that doesn't make much sense. Doesn't make much sense because it is, you know, think about a computer. Can a computer arise out of randomness? It self-assembles, it figures out how to do it. I mean, that's nonsense. Okay? It happens through a process of trial and error, variations and selections, which are guided by human consciousness. So all of a sudden, you see that there is a possibility that even this universe is created by a process of, you know, variations and selections that are controlled by the vaster consciousness of this energy of which everything is made.
It's like it's a fabric of our universe, is what you're saying. It's a very fabric.
Is the stuff of which is made.
Yeah, yeah.
So matter is simply a manifestation, a particular dynamic manifestation of this energy of which everything is made. And so matter is par force also conscious. But obviously we are a very complex structure of matter. Okay? And we are a complex structure of matter made of cells, and cells are conscious. And they can support consciousness because they are quantum systems. The atoms and molecules inside a cell interact as waves, not as particles. They also appear as particles, but their fundamental interaction, particularly the interactions that are related to consciousness, are interactions that are quantum mechanical, meaning They depend on the wave properties of matter.
But this can't be proven from an external perspective right now, you're saying.
Well, I mean,
it's hard to, we can't prove with what we have.
Well, I mean, you know, I want to arrive at proving that it makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
yeah.
you cannot, see, you cannot prove that matter is the foundation of everything either.
Yeah.
You take that as a presupposition, I mean, an assumption, a postulate, okay? So if you take matter is the beginning of everything, and you derive everything else, then perforce consciousness is produced by matter. That's how science works, that's how mathematics works. You have to make some assumptions, and then you derive logically the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If we assume that consciousness is primary, then I got to show how matter arises out of consciousness. You know, physicists cannot prove that consciousness arises out of matter, because they cannot show any evidence that feelings can be produced by matter. And feelings are the fundamental manifestation of consciousness, the cognitive manifestation, because feelings are the way we know. When you know, how do you know? You know because you feel so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you know,
yeah.
that, you know, I look outside and I see trees and so on. You know, those trees actually are, they're not out there per se. I don't know what's out there, because all that I believe is out there is what I have constructed in my brain through the sensory brain system. So it is actually a construction. There is all kinds of stuff out there which I do not perceive. Other beings may perceive the other stuff and not even see trees. They see something else. So that's how reality is constructed. Is actually in a large part, is an illusion of our information processing. And certainly, I feel reality, I perceive reality out there, but even that is a projection, because reality, I have constructed it in my brain. So even if we say that brain contains everything, well, that reality out there is actually in my brain, and it is a projection of something else out there, projected into my brain. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you end up in a, but it's not solipsism, because there is something out there, but it is not the something that we believe we see when we look outside. Mm-hmm. There's only an infinite way of looking at the reality which is out there. The bottom reality. The bottom reality is essentially unknowable, because we can only know what we perceive. If we put instruments, even the very instruments that we put are designed by us based on our based on what we believe that we might find out there. So we are inside a box. Now, the box can be enlarged little by little, but we're still inside a box.
Yeah. Do you think, well, you described that physics can't really explain feelings. Like, do you think that there's a limitation with science in explaining these phenomena, or do you think that if you just keep, chipping away at it, there will be some sort of explanation that you're describing?
Well, if you start with the idea that you start with this energy, which is of which everything is made, which is conscious, then all that exists is this energy, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this energy then, being conscious, has the ability to know. And what is there to know if not to know itself? That's all there is there, right? So you got to know. So you start with this postulate that the fundamental purpose of everything that exists is for consciousness to know itself. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So if that is the purpose, and you ascribe power, or capacities of that energy, which are not unlimited, well, then that's another assumption. Then consciousness will never be able to know completely itself. There is always something new to know about itself. And of course, if we look at reality, the way we perceive it based on what we know what science has revealed to us, we see that the unbelievable creativity and complexity of reality. So, and if this is just one of the many universes now that the multiverse is in vogue, is beginning to get in vogue, right? Then I mean, we are talking about, potentially being at this forever, right?
Yeah.
So, whether that is true or not, whether even time exists within, in that, at the level of that energy. In fact, time, it is again the proper thing to say that time and space, the way we understand it in our experience here, are not necessarily what have to exist where this energy exists. So it exists in its own space and in its own time that have nothing to do with the space and time that we perceive in this world. In fact, even the time and space that we perceive ourselves is limited by very narrow frequencies of light, of the ability to process information and so on. So, I mean, we only experience certain dimensions of time, certain dimensions of space. Okay?
Yeah.
So it is sensible to say that this process of knowing itself, of consciousness, is lasting forever. There is never an end to it.
Yeah.
Because there is always something new to discover. Besides, and this, now we get into details that probably should be left out, otherwise it gets more and more complicated. But basically, this consciousness is not a flat thing. It is structure itself. In other words, the structure of the physical world is a reflection of an inherent structure of consciousness. Because if consciousness creates the physical world, it creates something that emerges from itself. So the structure that you see in the physical world has to be somehow reflected in an internal structure of consciousness, right? Of this energy. So the layer or structure of the world where you have elementary particles and then atoms and then molecules and molecules of molecules and on and on. So this hierarchical structure that we see in the physical world has to be reflected into an hierarchical structures of consciousness, and therefore each level in the hierarchy has to have different selves. Because consciousness, by being able to know itself, knows itself as a hierarchical structure, and on it goes. So you can see how quickly you can create a theory, so to speak, that begins to explain, has explanatory power, which is very strong, because already in this theory you already have model for now. It's a theory when it's proven mathematically and makes predictions that are verifiable, but this model allows you to explain the reality that we observe in a much more satisfactory way. Instead of explaining only the outer aspects, you also explain the inner aspects, and you explain how the inner aspects are connected with the outer aspects, which now physics cannot do anything about it, because they have been excluded a priori by starting with the idea that only matter exists. If only matter exists, you got to be able to probe inside the brain and see a thought and see a thought. But you cannot. You only can see correlates of a thought. The thought does not exist in the brain, because the thought, if you think a second, is actually a feeling. A thought is an image that immediately gets translated into words. You do that so automatically that you don't even pay attention to the feeling, but it is that feeling, the one that makes you translate the thought into words, and the words are only symbols of something deeper. The outer world is only a world of symbols. The inner world is where reality, where ontology is. If you start with cognitive principles instead of materialistic principles. You start by materialistic principle, there is only outside. There is nothing inside. Therefore, we are machines.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, you pick which one you want to be.
Well, do you think that this, you described that the purpose of the universe is to know itself via consciousness, correct?
The purpose of consciousness is to know itself.
Okay.
And the universe is built out of consciousness.
Okay.
Because this energy produces structures out of itself, which we then perceive through our body, perceive as the world.
Yeah.
You see?
Do you ascribe that to more on a micro level, like the human search for meaning? Do you think that does this have sort of any answer to that question? Do you
Of course,
that?
of course.
Is that the human search for meaning to know itself via consciousness?
Of course. I mean, but why? Do you think that a machine, has an inner search of meaning? I mean, it may say the words because you put them in memory. The programmer, which is a human being that understands what meaning is through his own true inner experience. Then you make machines which are imitation of yourself, and they say the words which are only symbols, but there is no meaning behind, because meaning resides in consciousness. It is consciousness that gives meaning to our life.
So do you think, we might be able to answer this question finally, do you think that the meaning of life is for like a human being to know itself via consciousness?
Yes.
It's done, it's answered. I figured that's
because you want to, to know means to actually experience yourself.
Okay.
Knowledge is not about symbols, it is about experience.
Yeah.
So to know yourself, you have to experience yourself. That's the whole point. I mean, you don't, you go to school to get knowledge. Knowledge is symbolic. If you don't understand, you repeat the words. You get even an A if you repeat the words. You didn't understand a damn thing of what you're saying. Okay, you still get an A, because people don't put the emphasis on the meaning; they put emphasis on knowledge. But I'm talking about meaning. I'm talking about what you actually see about yourself, and that you can only have through a experience. Okay? It's like I can describe an apple to you. You've never eaten an apple. I can spend thousands of words. You will never understand what I mean when I describe the taste of an apple until you taste the apple. When you taste the apple, now you understand what I said. But before, you could not recreate the feeling, the experience of eating an apple by my description of the taste of an apple. You would imagine it, you would try to figure out what I'm saying, but it is completely different than actually tasting it. We live inside of reality, not outside watching reality from the outside, like physics looks at the observer that looks outside, like God looking at stuff happening under your eye. No, we are immersed in reality. We are part of reality, and our experience in that reality, inside that reality, is what is about. That's how we know ourselves.
Do you think that is something that would that be a negative thing if that sort of power, if it was, probable or possible to make a conscious computer, do you think that would be, is that quality meant to be uniquely human, do you think?
That is a quality. No, that quality. I mean, even atoms and molecules are conscious, but in their own way. We have no idea of what it means for, say, an electron to be conscious. But for one thing I can say for sure, not for sure, but very likely, is that there is only one consciousness for all the electrons that exist. There isn't like an electron is conscious and this consciousness is different than the other electron. The electrons are all identical. In fact, they obey a special statistical behavior called Fermi-Dirac statistics that arises out of the fact that you cannot distinguish one electron from another. So electrons are completely indistinguishable, therefore they have to be one. So there is only one electron that, scurries around all this reality, but is only oneself, one identity. Okay, so what I'm saying is that you can see right in this that we have to be careful about applying this view to physical things like panpsychism would do. You know, where they paint, you know, everything is conscious, blah blah blah, and then that ends there. You know, I mean, come on, you know, I'm talking about creating a model which actually is reflected into the physical world, because the physical world arises, as I said earlier, from that consciousness, and so from the inner structure of that consciousness. So it better be, you know, it better be able to explain, not just a bland thing. So what I'm talking about is not the classical panpsychism at all. It's actually, I don't know. I'm not a philosopher, so I don't invent words very easily. But it's something else. Okay. So basically, I'm talking about a consciousness as being something that requires much more work in order to be able to really, you know, disambiguate many of the wrong impressions that we have based on all the theories, all these the things that people have said and so on. So we have to start basically fresh. It's a fresh start with a cognitive principle, a few cognitive principles, and then seeing where we go, and then going back and maybe adjusting a little bit the principles, you know, fine-tuning the principles and going and so on. And fundamentally developing a new physics which has to have the same evidence, prove, you know, the same predictions that we already have, you know, tested, but then many new predictions which are not made by the current theories, and that prove that that approach is better, is closer to the truth than starting with matter. That's it. Because I don't believe that you know, in 100 years we'll know everything there is to know, even if you start with cognitive principles. Because you know, we go step by step and we find, you know, we go as far as we can, then we have to retrace our steps and change a little bit of the assumptions, like already happens in physics many times. Quantum physics was retracing, you know, many assumptions about the nature of reality that were made in classical physics. And so is general relativity or special relativity. You know, the nature of space and time that Newton had, or Galileo had, completely different in general relativity. And the nature of matter that Democritus and classical physics had, completely different than what quantum physics is revealing. So the same thing here. I mean, the same thing if we start this in this different way, okay, we'll go up to a point, you know, we go beyond, you know, the physics that we know today, but then we'll reach some limitations which are contained in some little tiny things that are wrong in the assumptions. And so it goes. Because the same process of discovery that we do while living inside matter, that I was mentioning earlier, in some other ways physicists do by looking at matter from the outside. Okay? But that's a complementary view from the view from inside. And the richer experience is not the experience of looking at the world from outside, but is living inside the world, which is only possible by conscious beings. And a computer may have conscious atoms and molecules, may have conscious crystals, you know, as crystals, but the computer is not aware that is, you know, of these elements that are switching inside. It doesn't, you know, that is a human construction. It's a human construction because what is a 1 and what is a 0 is a mental construct. And so, and the computer is only good to repeat in some ways what we put in, and to explore the boundaries with, you know, levels of learning which are, compared to what we do, elementary, explore the boundaries of what we put into that computer. But that exploration is mechanical, is not conscious. In other words, we can do that because we rely and we build up on the capacity of quantum systems, like the cells that we are composed of, quantum systems, to support a level of consciousness which is infinitely larger than a system entirely built of 3 + 1 matter, which is Boolean matter. Boolean matter doesn't allow you to have consciousness out of the creations of the combinations of Boolean matter. But because consciousness relies on the quantum aspects of reality, it is in the connecting, the pieces that connect matter with each other. It exists at that level. It exists in the wave property of electrons. Now when an electron appears here, that is an event in 3 + 1, but that event, this larger event, was behind the 3 + 1, was in that space that I was mentioning earlier, where you do quantum computation, that exists underneath the 3 + 1, which is the reality that we think exists. Okay? So the mystery is there, and it's the same mystery why quantum physics cannot explain the measurement problem. It's the same mystery, because it is connected with the fact that we do not understand how the collapse of the wave function occur. Nobody can. How can you exist? Stuff exists in the so-called Hilbert space, which is this space of n-dimensional, where n can be even infinite, and where you have stuff happening, and then there is a collapse of the wave function that manifests one of the many states in which a system can exist. Manifest that state in our reality. That's how physics explains it, but it's not an explanation really, because the theory does not tell you when and how that collapse of the wave function occurs. So there is something magic that happens.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And what does it? Nobody knows. Okay? So this model that I'm talking about sits right there, in that mystery, okay? And in time, because I've been at it seriously, like my only job for 3-4 years. I mean, I've been, thinking about it for 30 years, but in terms of putting all of my energy into this direction, it's been, 3 years ago. Yeah. So I've been, quite active right now, but so the ability to understand more deeply and explain more deeply is going to grow in time because of this energy that I'm putting into it. Yeah.
How do you feel that you've been able to free yourself from the framework, scientific framework, just a social framework to make these groundbreaking discoveries, or just to think these sort of thoughts? Because I think it's so revolutionary in the way you're addressing it. You're talking about a complete reframing of the system that we think our universe is built off of. Yeah. How do you think you've had that ability your whole life? How do you think you've been able to do that?
That's a very perceptive question, actually. Most people will not think that. In fact, it was the hardest thing to do, to free myself of a certain way of looking at reality, which was what I learned at school. That's what physics tells you, is done this way, and so you kind of take it as the truth.
Federico explains that spontaneously he enters into states of consciousness that give him insight into what he's studying. So he knows that it's true, and no one can take that away from him because he's experienced that. And he says that this is because he had such a strong, and continues to have, such a strong desire to understand consciousness. And he thinks that being in that state of mind has allowed him to have those experiences. I asked Federico how his study of consciousness, how his view that external reality is just an illusion of the senses, has impacted the way that he lives his daily life. Because I was thinking, if you view the outside world as a trick of the senses, doesn't that make your day-to-day life seem kind of fake? I feel like it would weigh him down a little bit, but he said it's quite the opposite.
You function better because you see, you perceive the world in a different way, in a completely different way than the way I certainly perceive the world in a completely different way. I perceived it when I was wedded to this worldview that I learned. You see.
Yeah.
You're much lighter because you know that it's a game. You know, so you play the game.
Oh,
You see what I mean?
love that answer. And that is that you take things less seriously in general.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's so interesting. I would have thought it would have been the opposite.
Of course, no.
Yeah.
No, because you know, I mean, you see the almost
illusion that it
the
is,
illusion
yeah.
and the irony of it,
Yeah.
you know, and the fact that before you thought that it was this way, and now you can see more clearly that this is not. Okay?
Yeah.
You still don't understand at all. Now don't misunderstand me, but but you pretty much got the gist of it, which is really you're inside a game. You know, you're playing a game, but it's an important game. It is fundamental game. So it isn't like a game. Therefore, you can toss it away.
Yeah.
No. Actually, before, when I was wedded to a certain worldview, there was more sense of unreality at that time than there is now, because now I see myself inside the game.
Okay.
Where before I didn't, you know, it was even frustrating, you know, not to understand, but what's going on here, you know, because I still was asking questions that were more philosophical, you know, than say, how does this work, or, you know, what equation do I apply here? And so that part was, I had to disconnect that part almost completely and disconnect myself from my own feelings in order to live in that world that was deprived of any meaning, really. So I had to let go of stuff inside of me because they were illusory anyway. Now, when you see the other way around, that stuff is actually not illusory, and what is illusory, what you thought it was the only real stuff, that is actually you smile.
Yeah.
You know?
I would think that would lend itself to being quite nihilistic in a lot of ways. Just interesting because you're saying it doesn't matter, but that does bring a whole new recognition of what does matter.
No, I mean, that's right. I mean, it would be nihilistic if you know, if you think that the inner world is illusory, like they were telling you before. If you think that world is illusory, okay, then there is illusion out, illusion in, said the whole thing is illusion, therefore that's nihilism. Okay?
Yeah.
And nothing exists, you know, basically. That's silly, right? You know, obviously there's something, you know, but that something is not what we think it is. That's what I'm saying. There is something, that something is not even close to what we think it is. Okay? And so now is the pleasure of discovering. What is it? You know, what is it? You know, out here and out there that is not like, you know, how would it work? How, you know, how can I explain it? Okay. So it's an incredible game.
Well, I'm really interested in how do you, with all of that in mind, and this is sort of an interesting question to bring back to, how do you define success in your own life? With all that in mind, is it just the passion for discovery, or is it actually making a concrete sort of, you know, product? Or
to me, success in my life, and I haven't reached that yet, is not what people tell you the success is you having a ball in your life. Okay? You enjoy your life from the inside, from your own feeling, seeing your living as a adventure. Every day, every moment is something new. Going with it. Embodying your life. You see? Instead of you know, moving up into your head and just being a thinking thing. You know, just living fully in the physical, in the emotional, in the mental, and in the spiritual level. We have all these levels to be sort of, you know, live through completely as much as you can. That's what a successful life is to me. I would not have defined that at all, like, you know, the same way 30 years ago.
Okay.
But now I see clearly. And so I also can now test myself, am I really, you know, do I really have a ball? And if you're honest with yourself, you say, well, you know, not now, or, you know, or I had a few moments where I really was into it. Okay, but in a way, a child is more into what I'm talking about than we are. Okay, is that kind of trust in life that the child has.
Yeah.
Because if you're fearful that something bad is going to happen to you, you contract. You cannot enjoy life. No way you can enjoy life. So fear has to go. Now that's a tall order.
Yeah.
Because we all have
huge.
all kinds of fears.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Okay, you deal with that by looking inside, looking at the source of fear within you, understanding it, and as you understand it, not by pretending that it's not there, or putting something on top to cover it up, or enduring it without facing it. So every fear needs to be faced. If you face your fear, you can conquer it. But you conquer it not in the sense of, slaying it. No, fear is energy, is your energy. That's why you got to transform face it and transform it, because it's energy which is corrupted by misunderstanding. It is basically not understood stuff that you need to, when you understand it, you undo the knots.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you recover your energy, your vital energy, which now is free to enjoy.
Oh, wow, okay. It's energy that's integral to you. You just need to reinterpret it.
That's right. Yeah, you cannot.
Oh, that's such a cool way of looking at it.
If you try to kick it away, most spiritual tradition tell you, that you got to conquer your ego, destroy your ego.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
You need your ego. Otherwise, who's going to drive the machine?
Yeah.
Which is your body. Your ego has to drive the machine, but it has to do just that.
Yeah.
Do it well, and let you be also the rest of what you are, that the ego is not. Okay, so it needs to be your friend, not your enemy.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, I started by taking, here and there, looking at what people were saying and then testing it inside my own experience. And sometimes it took a while before I said, no, that's wrong. It cannot be, because it doesn't stand to the intellect and the emotions or the mental or the spiritual aspects that I see in myself. So let's find out what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's how you get there. You get there by using your life as a mirror of what you're trying to understand, reflecting to you, a reality which is richer than what you find in the books. Because if all you do is just to understand what people are saying, you never get there from here. Because different people feel differently, explain differently, and so on. So so that's it doesn't work. You have to be engaged in your own self-realization, and the rest of it comes for free, so to speak. That's what I found for myself. So if I were to stop self-realizing myself, I don't think I could make progress even in my science. I would end up being stuck somewhere, because that energy that I don't want to see in myself, which is knotted up, that is what also impedes my intellect to see something new.
Yeah.
The creativity arises out of that freedom of your consciousness. Knotted up consciousness into angers, hatred, fear, and so on, pride, you name it, right?
Yeah.
That will impede you to actually finding the truth, even of your, search of how the world works.
Yeah. I don't think you can get much better than that.